1 year and 3 months after Sarah Martinez first knocked on Mrs. Chen's bakery door in a rainstorm, she stood in the same kitchen wearing a simple white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers that Lily and Emma had picked from the ranch's meadows. The November morning was crisp and clear, with golden autumn light streaming through the windows and the smell of Mrs. Chen's famous cinnamon rolls filling the air. "You look beautiful," Emma said, adjusting the small veil that had belonged to Maria Morrison. Jake had offered it to Sarah the night before, explaining that his first wife would have wanted her children to have a mother who understood that love was about addition, not replacement. "Are you nervous?" Lily asked, bouncing on her toes in her flower girl dress. "A little," Sarah admitted, though nervous didn't quite capture the mix of excitement, joy, and overwhelming gratitude that had kept her awake for most of the night. The wedding was small, held in the living room of the Morrison Ranch with about 30 guests. There was no church ceremony because Jake and Sarah had both agreed that their love story was too unconventional for traditional vows. Instead, they had written their own promises, words that reflected the unique path that had brought them together. Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church stood near the fireplace, smiling as the wedding party assembled. The twins served as ushers, proudly escorting elderly neighbors to their seats in the mismatched chairs that had been borrowed from the church fellowship hall. Tommy was the ring bearer, a job he took so seriously that he had practiced walking slowly with the small pillow for weeks. Sarah's parents had driven in from California, still somewhat bewildered by their daughter's sudden transformation from divorced kindergarten teacher to ranch wife and instant mother of 5. Her mother had initially been horrified by the idea, convinced that Sarah was making a terrible mistake. But, after spending 3 days at the ranch, watching Sarah navigate the beautiful chaos of the Morrison family with obvious joy, she had pulled her daughter aside. "I was wrong," she had said simply. "I thought you were settling for less than you deserved. But, watching you with these children, seeing how happy you are, this is exactly what you were meant for." Jake's family was represented by his older sister Linda and her husband, who had driven down from Great Falls. Linda had been skeptical of Sarah at first, worried that her brother was moving too fast and taking on too much responsibility. But, when she saw how naturally Sarah fit into the family dynamic, how the children bloomed under her attention, she had given Jake her full blessing. Maria would have loved her, Linda had told Jake the night before the wedding. "She would have been grateful that you found someone who sees these kids as a gift, not a burden." Now, as Sarah took Jake's hand at the front of the living room, surrounded by the 5 children who had already made her feel like the luckiest mother in the world, she thought about how many people had told her this day would never come. Not just the wedding, but this feeling of completeness, of being exactly where she belonged. "Friends and family," Pastor Williams began, "we are gathered today to celebrate the union of Jake and Sarah, but also to recognize the family they have already created together. This is not just a marriage, but the formalization of bonds that have been growing stronger for over a year." Sarah looked out at the small crowd and saw Mrs. Chen dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The elderly baker had become like a grandmother to the Morrison children, and she had insisted on providing all the food for the reception. Several of Sarah's former teaching colleagues were there, including the principal who had been shocked when Sarah announced she was leaving her job to homeschool the ranch children. "It's too much to take on," he had warned. 5 children, a struggling ranch, a man with that kind of baggage, you're setting yourself up for heartbreak. But, as Sarah looked at Jake, handsome in his best suit with his hair neatly combed and his eyes bright with happiness, she knew she was setting herself up for the greatest adventure of her life. "Jake," Pastor Williams said, "do you take Sarah to be your wife, your partner in all things, your teammate in raising these beautiful children?" "I do," Jake said, his voice strong and clear. "Sarah, you came into our lives when we needed you most, but you didn't just save us. You made us complete. I promise to love you, to support your dreams, to share the good times and the hard times, and to never forget that the best day of my life was when you decided we were worth fighting for." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Jake slipped the simple gold band onto her finger. They had picked it out together from a small jewelry store in town, nothing fancy but chosen with care. "Sarah," Pastor Williams continued, "do you take Jake to be your husband, Emma, Jake Jr., Jesse, Lily, and Tommy to be your children, and this ranch to be your home?" "I do," Sarah said, looking not just at Jake but at each of the 5 children who were watching the ceremony with rapt attention. "Jake,
You taught me that family isn't about biology or perfect circumstances. It's about choosing to love each other every single day. Emma, you showed me that being a mother means being brave enough to put someone else's needs first. Boys, she said, looking at the twins, you taught me that love multiplies instead of divides. Lily, you showed me that the smallest gestures can have the biggest impact. And, Tommy, you proved that the best way to fix something broken is with patience and creativity. She paused, looking back at Jake. I promise to love this family with everything I have, to support this ranch and this life we're building together, and to never forget that the day I met all of you was the day I finally came home. There wasn't a dry eye in the room as Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife. When Jake kissed Sarah, the children cheered so loudly that the sound carried across the pastures, probably scaring the cattle. The reception was held in the barn, which the whole family had spent weeks decorating with fall leaves and white lights. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with a feast that included barbecued beef from the Morrison Ranch, her famous dinner rolls, and a 3-layer chocolate cake that Tommy had helped design. As the evening progressed and neighbors shared stories and toasts, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching her new family. Jake was deep in conversation with another rancher about cattle prices, his hand absently resting on Lily's shoulder as she leaned against him. Emma was helping Mrs. Chen serve cake, moving with the grace and responsibility that would always be part of her character. The twins were entertaining a group of younger cousins with magic tricks they had learned from a library book, while Tommy was showing off his toy ranch to anyone who would pay attention. Happy? Linda Morrison asked, coming to stand beside Sarah. Beyond happy, Sarah replied. I still can't quite believe this is real. It's real, Linda assured her. And it's exactly what this family needed. Jake's been carrying the weight of the world for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone share the load. As if he had heard them talking about him, Jake appeared at Sarah's side, sliding his arm around her waist. What are my two favorite ladies discussing? Your wife, Linda said with a grin. I was just telling her she's stuck with all of us now. Lucky me, Sarah said, and meant it completely. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the children were finally in bed, Sarah and Jake sat on the front porch swing, still wearing their wedding clothes and sharing a piece of leftover cake. The November air was cold, but they were wrapped in a quilt that Emma had made in her home economics class, and neither of them wanted to go inside and end this perfect day. So, Mrs. Morrison, Jake said, testing out her new name, any regrets? Sarah considered the question seriously. A year and a half ago, she had been a lonely woman convinced that she was broken beyond repair. Tonight, she was a wife and mother, co-owner of a ranch, and part of a family that filled every day with purpose and joy. The transformation had been so complete that sometimes she felt like she was living someone else's life. Just one, she said finally. Jake's face fell. What? I regret waiting so long to find you, Sarah said, laughing at his expression. I regret all those years I spent believing I was incomplete, when really I was just waiting for the right family to complete. Jake pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. I used to think Maria was my one great love, and that when she died, that part of my life was over. I never imagined I could love someone else, or that someone could love our crazy, complicated family the way you do. It's not complicated, Sarah protested. It's just big. And loud. And messy. And absolutely perfect. As if to prove her point, Tommy's voice drifted down from his bedroom window. Mom! Dad! I can't find my stuffed horse. Sarah started to get up, but Jake caught her hand. I'll go. It's under his bed. It's always under his bed. As Jake headed inside to help their youngest son, Sarah stayed on the porch swing, wrapped in Emma's quilt and thinking about the word that had just changed her world forever. Mom! Tommy had called her mom, as naturally as if she had always been part of his vocabulary. The journey to motherhood had been nothing like what Sarah had expected. There had been no pregnancy or baby showers or cute newborn photos.
Instead, there had been rainy days and broken trucks, math homework and grilled cheese sandwiches, bank loans and family meetings, and gradually earning the trust of 5 children who had already lost one mother. But, sitting here on the porch of the Morrison Ranch, listening to her husband help their son find his lost toy while her stepdaughter practiced piano in the living room and the twins argued about something in their shared bedroom, Sarah knew that this was exactly the family she was meant to have. The doctors had been right about one thing: Sarah's body would never create a child. But they had been completely wrong about everything else. Being a mother wasn't about biology or medical procedures or following someone else's definition of family. It was about showing up every day, about choosing love over and over again, about finding the people who needed you as much as you needed them. 6 months after the wedding, Sarah officially adopted all 5 Morrison children in a ceremony that was even more emotional than their wedding had been. The courthouse in the county seat was packed with family and friends, and when the judge declared that Emma, Jake Jr., Jesse, Lily, and Tommy were now legally Sarah's children, the celebration was louder than anything the old building had ever heard. Emma, now 13 and beginning to look more like a young woman than a child, had been the one to suggest the adoption. "It's not that we want to replace Mom," she had explained to Jake. "But Sarah is our mom too now. She should get to be official." The paperwork had taken months, but Sarah had spent the time learning about each child's history, their medical records, their school files, all the documentation that made their lives official. She memorized their birthdays, their favorite foods, their fears and dreams, and the little habits that irritated their siblings. Tommy, now 5 and starting kindergarten, told his teacher that he had 2 moms, one who lived in heaven and watched over the ranch, and one who made the best pancakes in Montana and helped him fix everything that got broken. The ranch itself had slowly returned to prosperity under Sarah's careful financial management and Jake's hard work. They had paid off the bank loan 2 months early and had started saving money for improvements and emergencies. Sarah had used her teaching skills to homeschool the children, allowing them to help with ranch work while still getting an excellent education. Emma had shown real aptitude for the business side of ranching, helping Sarah track expenses and plan budgets. The twins had developed into excellent horsemen and were already talking about raising their own cattle someday. Lily had declared herself the official ranch veterinarian and read every book about animal care she could find. And Tommy had appointed himself chief ranch repair specialist, though his methods still relied heavily on tape and determination. On the 1-year anniversary of their wedding, Jake surprised Sarah with a gift that made her cry. It was a wooden sign that he had carved himself, meant to hang by the ranch entrance. It read, "Morrison Family Ranch, Jake, Sarah, Emma, Jake Jr., Jesse, Lily and Tommy EST 1952, re-established 2024. "Re-established?" Sarah asked, tracing the letters with her finger. "That's when we became a real family again," Jake explained. "When you decided we were worth keeping." That evening, the whole family worked together to hang the new sign at the end of their long driveway. As Sarah watched her children argue good-naturedly about the proper height and angle, she thought about all the people who had told her she couldn't be a mother, couldn't build a family, couldn't have the life she dreamed of. They had been wrong about everything that mattered. Sarah Martinez Morrison wasn't the mother she had planned to be. She was something better, the mother she had chosen to be, for children who had chosen her right back. She hadn't given birth to her family, but she had fought for it, invested in it, and loved it into existence with every fiber of her being. The ranch stretched out around them in the gathering twilight, cattle grazing peacefully in pastures that now felt as much like home to Sarah as her childhood bedroom once had. The mountains rose in the distance, solid and eternal, witnesses to the daily miracles of ordinary life lived with extraordinary love. As they walked back to the house together, all 7 members of the Morrison family, Sarah felt a deep sense of gratitude for the rainy day that had brought them together. She had set out that morning over 2 years ago thinking she was just helping a stranger with a broken truck. Instead, she had found her destiny. The doctors had told Sarah she couldn't be a mother. A cowboy with 5 children had seen her differently. And, in choosing each other, they had created something beautiful, a family built not on biology or convenience, but on the simple, powerful decision to love each other no matter what. In the end, that had made all the difference. 3 weeks had passed since the rainy Saturday that changed everything for Sarah Martinez. She had visited the Morrison Ranch 5 more times, each visit feeling more natural than the last. What had started as dinner invitations had evolved into something that felt like belonging. Sarah found herself looking forward to Friday afternoons in a way she never had before. She would pack a small bag with clothes for the weekend and drive the 15 miles to the ranch, where 5 children would run out to greet her car as if she was the most important person in their world. On this particular Friday evening in late September, Sarah was helping Emma with her math homework while the twins practiced their reading at the kitchen table. Lily was coloring a picture of horses, and Tommy was building an elaborate structure with blocks that he claimed was a fixing machine. Jake was outside checking on the cattle before dark. "Miss Martinez," Emma said, looking up from her algebra problems, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetie," Sarah replied, setting down her pencil. "Are you going to marry my dad?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She and Jake had been careful around the children, never showing more affection than friendship, even though something deeper was clearly growing between them. They hadn't even talked about what was happening between them, let alone marriage. "What makes you ask that?" Sarah managed. Emma shrugged with the casual wisdom of a 12-year-old who had seen too much of adult complications. "He's happier when you're here. We all are. And you look at us like we're yours." Before Sarah could respond, Jake's voice came from the doorway. "Emma, that's not really appropriate dinner conversation." "I was just wondering," Emma said, not looking embarrassed at being caught. "It would be okay with me if you did. Marry her, I mean." Jake's face turned red, and Sarah felt her own cheeks burning. "Emma, go check on your brothers and sister, please," he said in the voice that meant the discussion was over. After Emma left, Jake sat down across from Sarah at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry about that. She's been asking a lot of questions lately." "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked. Jake rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she had learned meant he was uncomfortable. "About you. About why you're here so much. About whether you're going to stay." "What do you tell her?" "That I don't know," Jake said honestly. "Because I don't know what this is, Sarah. I know I look forward to seeing your car in my driveway. I know the kids have never taken to anyone the way they've taken to you. And I know I think about you when you're not here." Sarah's heart was racing, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "I think about you too. All of you. But thinking and doing are two different things," Jake continued. "I can't offer you much, Sarah. This place is barely hanging on financially. I've got 5 kids who need everything from clothes to college funds. I work 18-hour days and still fall behind on bills." "I don't need you to offer me anything," Sarah said quietly. "I'm here because I want to be here." Jake leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "But why? You could have any life you wanted. You could find someone without all this baggage, someone who could give you your own children, your own fresh start." The conversation Sarah had been dreading for weeks was finally happening, and she realized she was ready for it. "I can't have children, Jake. Not biologically. The doctors were very clear about that." Jake's expression softened immediately. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I didn't know." "It's why my marriage ended," Sarah continued. "David wanted biological children, and when it became clear that wasn't going to happen, we fell apart. Everyone felt sorry for me, the woman who couldn't be a real mother." "That's not true," Jake said firmly. "Isn't it?" Sarah asked. "That's what I believed for a long time. But then, I met your family, and something changed. Your children don't care that I can't have babies. They care that I help Emma with her math homework and that I remember Tommy likes his grilled cheese cut diagonally. They care that I show up." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "They love you," he said simply. "And I love them," Sarah replied. "All of them. Including their stubborn, hard-working father who thinks he has to carry the world on his shoulders." They sat in silence for a moment, hands linked across the kitchen table where the Morrison family shared their meals and homework and daily dramas. Outside, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "So what do we do now?"
Jake asked. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But, I'd like to figure it out together.
2 months later, Sarah was no longer a weekend visitor to the Morrison Ranch. She had moved out of her apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery and into the spare bedroom that had once served as Maria Morrison's sewing room. The children had voted unanimously on the arrangement, even though Jake had worried it was too much too soon.
Miss Martinez belongs here, Tommy had announced with 4-year-old certainty.
She makes the best pancakes, and she knows how to fix everything. The transition hadn't been without challenges. Sarah was used to living alone, to having her belongings organized exactly the way she wanted them, to quiet evenings with a book and a cup of tea. The Morrison house was loud and chaotic, with 5 different schedules to manage and constant motion from dawn until well past bedtime. There were moments when Sarah wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. Like the morning when she woke up to find that Tommy had decided to help by washing the kitchen floor with an entire bottle of dish soap, creating a slippery mess that took 2 hours to clean up. Or the afternoon when the twins got into a fight that ended with a broken window and tears from everyone involved. But there were also moments that took her breath away with their perfect simplicity. Like watching Jake teach Lily how to ride a horse, his large hands gentle as he guided the little girl around the corral. Or helping Emma pick out a dress for the school dance, seeing the young girl's confidence bloom under someone's focused attention. Or the evening when all 5 children piled onto the couch to watch a movie, automatically making space for Sarah in the middle as if she had always belonged there. The biggest adjustment was learning to navigate the delicate balance of authority in a house where Emma had been functioning as the responsible adult for 3 years. Sarah didn't want to step on the girl's toes or undermine her position, but she also wanted to give Emma the chance to be a 12-year-old instead of a substitute mother. You don't have to take care of everyone, Sarah told Emma one evening as they worked together in the kitchen.
That's my job now.
But what if you leave?
Emma asked with the bluntness that Sarah had come to expect from the Morrison children.
The question cut straight to Sarah's deepest fear.
What if she couldn't handle this life? What if the reality of raising 5 children proved too difficult? What if Jake realized he had made a mistake letting her into their carefully balanced family? I'm not planning to leave, Sarah said carefully.
But you could, Emma pressed.
Adults leave sometimes. They don't mean to, but they do. Sarah set down the dish she was washing and turned to face Emma fully. You're right. I could leave. But I could also stay. And, right now, staying is what I want to do more than anything else in the world. Emma studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Okay. But, if you're going to stay, you need to know some things. Over the next hour, Emma shared what she called the Morrison Family Survival Guide. Tommy had nightmares about once a week and needed someone to sit with him until he fell back asleep. The twins fought constantly but were fiercely protective of each other when threatened by outsiders. Lily was allergic to strawberries but would eat them anyway if no one was watching because she liked the way they tasted. Jake pretended he didn't like vegetables but would eat anything if it was mixed into a casserole. And Dad worries about everything, Emma concluded. But especially about money. He doesn't like us to know, but sometimes I hear him on the phone with the bank. This last piece of information worried Sarah more than anything else Emma had shared. She had noticed that Jake often worked late into the evening after the children were in bed, poring over papers at the kitchen table with a calculator and a worried expression. When she asked about it, he would always brush off her concerns with a quick smile and a change of subject. The truth about the ranch's financial situation became clear 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. Sarah was helping Lily with her homework when Jake came in from checking the cattle, his face grim. He kissed the top of Lily's head and asked Sarah to step outside with him. We need to talk, he said, and Sarah's stomach dropped. They walked to the corral where Jake's horses were eating their evening hay. The November air was crisp, and Sarah pulled her sweater tighter as they stood watching the animals. I got a call from the bank today, Jake said without preamble. They're not going to extend the loan. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. What does that mean? It means I have until January to come up with $60,000, or they're going to foreclose on the ranch. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. $60,000? Jake nodded, his jaw tight. I've been behind on payments since Maria got sick.
Used up everything we had saved for her medical bills, then borrowed against the ranch to keep going. Thought I could catch up, but with cattle prices down and the drought last summer.
What are you going to do? Sarah asked, though she was afraid of the answer.
I don't know, Jake admitted. I've looked into selling some of the cattle, but that won't be nearly enough.
Could sell the equipment, but then I couldn't work the ranch anyway. Sarah's mind was racing. What about getting a job in town?
Something with a regular salary?
Jake shook his head. Who's going to hire someone with no experience outside of ranching?
And even if I could find something, it would mean giving up the ranch anyway.
This land's been in my family for 3 generations, Sarah.
My dad would roll over in his grave if I lost it. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the horses and thinking about impossible solutions to an overwhelming problem.
Finally, Sarah spoke.
I have some money saved, she said quietly. Jake turned to look at her sharply.
No. Just hear me out, Sarah continued.
I have about $40,000 in my savings account.
Money I was supposed to use for fertility treatments that I don't need anymore. Absolutely not, Jake said firmly. I won't take your money, Sarah.
It's not taking if it's an investment, Sarah argued.
This ranch could be profitable again.
The land is good, the location is perfect, and you know what you're doing.
You just need time to get back on your feet.
Jake was already shaking his head.
And what happens if it doesn't work? What happens if I lose your money along with everything else?
You'd have nothing, and neither would we.
Then, at least we would have tried, Sarah said. Jake, I don't care about the money.
I care about this place, about keeping this family together. That's not your responsibility, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction.
Yes, it is, Sarah replied firmly. I chose this family. I chose this life. That makes it my responsibility too.
Jake looked out over his land, the mountains rising in the distance, the pastures where his cattle grazed. Sarah could see the war going on in his face, pride battling with desperation, love for his family fighting with his determination to handle his own problems. I can't ask you to risk everything for us, he said finally.
You're not asking, Sarah pointed out. I'm offering.
That night, after the children were in bed, Sarah and Jake sat at the kitchen table with a calculator, a stack of bills, and Sarah's bank statements. Together, they worked out a plan that would use Sarah's savings to catch up on the loan payments and provide enough operating capital to get through the winter.
It's still a gamble, Jake warned. Ranching is never a sure thing. Neither is love, Sarah replied. But some things are worth the risk.
Jake looked at her across the table, his gray eyes soft with emotion.
Are you sure about this?
Sarah thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago, living alone above a bakery, believing she was broken because she couldn't have children. Then, she thought about the woman she was becoming, surrounded by the chaos and love of the Morrison family, finally, understanding that being a mother had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, she said. The next morning, Sarah drove into town to meet with her banker while Jake stayed home with the children.
Mrs.
Chen waved from the bakery window as Sarah parked outside the bank, and Sarah waved back, remembering the rainy morning that had started this whole journey. The bank transaction took less than an hour, but it felt like the most important hour of Sarah's life. When she walked out with a cashier's check for $40,000, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. She was betting everything on a future that wasn't guaranteed, on a family that wasn't technically hers, on a man who was too proud to ask for help but too honorable to let his children suffer. When she returned to the ranch, Jake was in the barn with the twins, teaching them how to properly care for the horse's tack. Sarah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching this man who had somehow become the center of her world, and knew she had made the right choice.
Dad, Jake Jr. called out, spotting Sarah first. Miss Martinez is back.
Jake looked up, his eyes immediately going to Sarah's face. She nodded slightly, and she saw his shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. That afternoon, Jake drove to the bank with Sarah's check and a stack of paperwork. When he returned, he found Sarah in the kitchen helping Emma prepare dinner while the younger children did their homework at the table. "It's done," he announced. "The loan is current, and we've got enough left over to make it through spring." The children cheered, though Sarah wasn't sure they fully understood what had almost happened to their home. Emma, however, understood perfectly. She looked at Sarah with an expression of gratitude and respect that made Sarah feel like she had finally, truly earned her place in this family. That evening, after the dishes were done and the children were getting ready for bed, Jake asked Sarah to walk with him to the front porch. They sat on the old wooden swing that had been there since Jake was a child, looking out over the land that was now as much Sarah's as it was his. "I don't know how to thank you," Jake said quietly. "You don't have to thank me," Sarah replied. "This is my home now too." Jake took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Sarah, I need you to know that what you did today, it wasn't just about the money. You saved more than the ranch. You saved our family." "No," Sarah said, leaning against his shoulder. "You saved mine." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Sarah thought about all the people who had told her she couldn't be a mother, who had made her feel broken and incomplete. They had been wrong about so many things. Being a mother wasn't about biology or fertility treatments or following someone else's timeline. It was about showing up, day after day, for the people who needed you. It was about choosing to love, even when that love came with risks and complications and no guarantees. The Morrison Ranch was safe for now, but Sarah knew the real work was just beginning. There would be bad days and good days, moments of doubt and moments of perfect clarity. There would be cattle to tend and children to raise and bills to pay and dreams to protect. But, for the first time in her adult life, Sarah Martinez felt like she was exactly where she belonged. She was part of something bigger than herself, something worth fighting for, something that had made her whole in ways she had never imagined possible. From inside the house, she could hear the children settling into their bedrooms, their voices carrying through the open windows as they said their goodnights and made their plans for tomorrow. Soon, one of them would call for a glass of water or help finding a lost toy, and Sarah would go inside to help because that's what mothers do. And, in the morning, she would wake up in the Morrison house, surrounded by the family she had chosen and the life she had built from the pieces of dreams that had seemed broken beyond repair. The doctors had been right about one thing: Sarah Martinez would never give birth to a child. But they had been wonderfully, completely wrong about everything else. Sarah Martinez stood at the kitchen window of her small apartment, watching the rain streak down the glass. At 32, she had heard the same words so many times they felt like a broken record playing in her head. "You can't have children, Sarah. Your body just won't allow it." The doctors had been saying this for 8 years now, ever since she married her college sweetheart, David. The marriage had ended 2 years ago, not because David didn't love her, but because the pressure of trying to start a family had torn them apart. He wanted children desperately, and Sarah felt like she was failing him every month when the pregnancy test came back negative. The fertility treatments had drained their savings and their hope. When David finally said he needed space to think about their future, Sarah knew what that meant. 6 months later, the divorce papers arrived. Now she lived alone in a tiny apartment above Mrs. Chen's bakery in the small town of Millbrook, Montana. The smell of fresh bread rose through the floorboards every morning, a comforting reminder that life continued even when your own felt stuck in place. Sarah worked as a kindergarten teacher at the local elementary school, surrounded by children who belonged to other people. She loved them fiercely, but each day reminded her of what she believed she could never have. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the unpaved roads around town into muddy rivers. Sarah pulled her sweater tighter and glanced at the clock. It was Saturday morning, and she had planned to drive out to the farmer's market, but the weather had other ideas. She was reaching for her coffee when she heard a commotion outside. Through the rain, she could see a large pickup truck stuck in the mud at the bottom of the hill near her building. The truck was loaded with hay bales, and steam was rising from under the hood. A tall man in a worn cowboy hat was standing beside it, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Even from her second-story window, Sarah could see he was soaked to the bone. What caught her attention, though, were the 5 children pressed against the truck's windows, their faces filled with worry as they watched their father struggle with the broken-down vehicle. The youngest looked to be about 4 years old, while the oldest might have been 12. Sarah had seen them around town before but had never really paid attention to their story. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her raincoat and headed downstairs. Mrs. Chen was already at her door, peering out at the scene. "That's Jake Morrison," Mrs. Chen said, wiping flour from her hands on her apron. "Poor man's been raising those children on his own since his wife died 3 years ago.
Ranch is struggling, and now this." Sarah had heard whispers about Jake Morrison around town.
People spoke about him with a mixture of respect and pity. He had taken over his father's cattle ranch when the old man had a heart attack, but drought and falling cattle prices had made things difficult. Adding 5 children to the mix seemed impossible to most people in Millbrook. "I'll go see if I can help," Sarah said, pulling up her hood. Mrs. Chen grabbed her arm gently. "Be careful, dear. That man carries a lot of weight on his shoulders." Sarah splashed through the puddles and approached the truck. Up close, she could see that Jake Morrison was even more overwhelmed than he had appeared from her window. His face was lined with exhaustion, and his clothes were patches of different fabrics, clearly mended multiple times. The children in the truck were quiet now, but she could sense their anxiety. "Excuse me," Sarah called over the sound of the rain. "Do you need some help?" Jake looked up, surprised to see a stranger approaching in the downpour. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray and troubled. "Engine's overheated," he said simply. "Been pushing her too hard, I guess." "Why don't you bring the children inside where it's warm?" Sarah suggested. "Mrs. Chen runs the bakery downstairs. She won't mind, and I live upstairs. We can wait for the rain to stop and figure out what to do about your truck." Jake hesitated. In a small town like Millbrook, everyone knew everyone else's business, and he had heard the talk about Sarah Martinez. People said she was the divorced teacher who couldn't have children, the woman who had lost her husband because she was broken somehow. But, standing here in the rain, soaked and worried about his kids catching cold, he didn't have many options. "That's very kind," he said finally. "Kids, we're going to go inside for a bit." The truck doors opened, and 5 children tumbled out like a small parade. The oldest, a girl with braided brown hair, immediately took charge of the youngest, a boy with gap-toothed grin who couldn't seem to stop fidgeting. Between them were 3 others, twin boys who looked to be about 8, and another girl who appeared to be around 6. "I'm Emma," the oldest girl said politely, extending her hand to Sarah. "This is Tommy, and those are the twins, Jake Jr. and Jesse. And this little one is Lily." Sarah was struck by how well-mannered the children were, despite their obvious worry about their father and their current situation. "I'm Miss Martinez," she said. "Let's get you all dried off." Mrs. Chen had already opened her bakery door and was ushering the group inside. The warm air filled with the smell of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee felt like a hug after the cold rain. The children's eyes went wide at the sight of the pastries displayed in the glass cases. "Now then," Mrs. Chen said in her matter-of-fact way, "who wants hot chocolate?" While Mrs. Chen fussed over the children, Sarah found herself studying Jake Morrison. He stood near the door, dripping onto the old wooden floors, looking like he wanted to run back out into the storm rather than accept charity from strangers. She recognized that look. It was pride mixed with desperation, the expression of someone who had been carrying too much for too long. "Let me get you a towel," Sarah said. "And maybe some coffee." "I don't want to impose," Jake replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "It's no imposition," Sarah assured him. "Besides, your truck isn't going anywhere until this rain stops and we can figure out what's wrong with the engine." As if to emphasize her point, a loud clap of thunder shook the building, making little Tommy jump and grab onto his sister Emma's hand. Jake's shoulders sagged slightly as he realized they truly were stuck for the time being. Sarah brought him a cup of coffee and watched as he wrapped his cold hands around the warm mug. "Mrs. Chen mentioned you have a ranch outside town," she said, trying to make conversation. "Morrison Ranch," Jake confirmed. "About 15 miles east. Been in my family for 3 generations,"
though it might not make it to a fourth.
There was no self-pity in his voice, just a statement of fact that hit Sarah harder than if he had been complaining. She knew something about dreams that didn't work out the way you planned. "What kind of cattle do you raise?" she asked.
Mostly Angus.
"Had about 200 head last spring, down to about 150 now." Jake took a sip of his coffee and glanced over at his children, who were listening to Mrs. Chen tell a story about a dragon who loved to bake bread. "Market's been tough, and we lost some to that late freeze in April."
Sarah nodded, though she knew very little about ranching.
What she did know was the sound of someone fighting to keep their family together against difficult odds. She had heard that same determination in her own voice during the years of failed fertility treatments and mounting medical bills. "The kids seem wonderful," she offered. For the first time since she had approached his truck, Jake's expression softened. "They're everything," he said simply.
"Emma's 12 and thinks she needs to take care of everyone.
The twins are 8 and full of energy.
Lily's 6 and asks about 1,000,000 questions a day.
And Tommy's 4 and believes he can fix anything with enough tape and determination."
Sarah smiled at the obvious love in his voice.
"How do you manage the ranch and take care of all of them?"
"Not very well, apparently," Jake said with a dry laugh. "Emma does more than she should.
The boys help with feeding the cattle when they're not in school. And I've got Mrs. Patterson who watches the little ones when I'm working, but she's getting too old for 5 active kids."
As if summoned by the mention of her name, Emma appeared at Jake's elbow.
"Dad, Tommy spilled hot chocolate on his shirt. Mrs. Chen is trying to clean it up, but he's getting upset." Jake started to stand, but Sarah was already moving. "Let me help," she said.
"I'm used to dealing with spills and upset kids."
She found Tommy standing near the bakery counter, tears streaming down his face while Mrs. Chen dabbed at his shirt with a damp cloth. The 4-year-old was clearly overwhelmed by the strange place and the accident.
"Hey there, Tommy," Sarah said, crouching down to his eye level. "I heard you're really good at fixing things." Tommy nodded through his tears, sniffling loudly.
"Well, I bet you could help me figure out how to fix this shirt situation," Sarah continued.
"What do you think we should do?" Tommy considered this seriously.
"Maybe we need tape," he suggested.
Sarah pretended to think hard about this. "Tape is definitely good for fixing things. But, for clothes, I think we might need a different kind of fix. What if we took the shirt to my apartment upstairs and put it in the dryer?
Then, it would be warm and dry when you put it back on." "But then, I'd be cold," Tommy pointed out logically.
"That's a very good point," Sarah agreed. "But I think I might have a solution for that too."
10 minutes later, Tommy was wearing one of Sarah's oversized t-shirts that hung down to his knees like a dress, but he thought it was the funniest thing in the world. His giggles had infected the other children, and soon all 5 Morrison kids were laughing at their little brother's improvised outfit. Jake watched from the corner, his coffee cup forgotten in his hands. There was something about the way Sarah had handled Tommy's meltdown that struck him as natural and easy. She hadn't dismissed the boy's upset or tried to hurry him through it. Instead, she had treated his concerns seriously and found a solution that turned the problem into something fun. "You're good with them," he said when Sarah returned to his side. "I love kids," Sarah replied, then felt the familiar ache that comment always brought. "I'm a kindergarten teacher, so I get plenty of practice."
"Emma mentioned that she had you for kindergarten a few years ago," Jake said. "She still talks about that year sometimes. Said you made learning fun." Sarah remembered Emma Morrison now.
She had been a serious little girl even then, always looking out for the other children and seeming older than her years. She was a wonderful student.
Very responsible. "Too responsible," Jake said quietly.
"Sometimes I worry she's growing up too fast."
Before Sarah could respond, the lights flickered as another roll of thunder passed overhead.
Through the bakery windows, they could see that the rain was coming down even harder now, if that was possible. "Looks like we're going to be here for a while," Mrs. Chen observed, wiping down the counter.
"Good thing I made extra cinnamon rolls this morning." The next hour passed surprisingly quickly.
The children played quiet games while the adults talked, and Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the company. Jake Morrison was nothing like what she had expected based on the town gossip. He was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed slightly. He told stories about the ranch and his children that made Sarah laugh, and she shared some of her funnier classroom experiences in return. What impressed her most was how he talked about his children. There was no sense that he saw them as a burden or a limitation on his life. Despite the obvious challenges of raising 5 kids alone while trying to keep a struggling ranch afloat, Jake spoke about fatherhood like it was the greatest privilege he had ever been given.
"Wasn't always just me," he said when Sarah commented on how well-behaved the children were.
"My wife, Maria, she was the one who really knew how to handle them."
"I'm still learning." "How long has it been?" Sarah asked gently.
3 years in October, Jake replied.
"Cancer."
By the time they caught it, there wasn't much they could do. Sarah felt her heart clench. She had known loss, but not like that.
"I'm sorry."
"She made me promise to keep the family together," Jake continued. "Said the ranch could fail, the money could run out, but the kids needed to stay together. Some folks think I'm crazy for trying to manage all this on my own."
"What do you think?" Sarah asked.
Jake looked over at his children, who were now helping Mrs. Chen arrange cookies in the display case. Emma was patiently showing Tommy the right way to handle the delicate pastries, while the twins and Lily worked together to make sure everything was perfectly straight.
"I think they're worth fighting for," he said simply.
Around noon, the rain finally began to ease up. Jake went outside to check on his truck while Sarah helped Mrs. Chun clean up the impromptu gathering.
When he came back inside, his expression was grim. "Engine's not going to start today," he announced.
"And even if it did, the road's too muddy to get the truck up the hill with that load of hay."
"What will you do?" Sarah asked. Jake ran a hand through his damp hair. "Call Jimmy Peterson, I guess.
See if he can come out with his tow truck tomorrow when the roads dry up some."
"We'll have to walk home." "Walk 15 miles?" Sarah said, looking at the children. "In this weather?"
"We've walked farther," Emma said matter-of-factly, though Sarah could see the tiredness in the girl's eyes. "Actually," Sarah said before she could stop herself, "I have a car.
I could drive you home." Jake shook his head immediately. "That's too much to ask. You've already done more than enough." "It's not too much," Sarah insisted. "Besides, I'd like to see your ranch."
"I've lived in Millbrook for 2 years and never been out that way." The truth was, Sarah didn't want this unexpected day to end. For the first time in months, she had felt useful, needed in a way that had nothing to do with pity or charity. The Morrison family had a completeness to it that she envied, but being around them didn't make her feel broken the way she usually did around families. Instead, she felt like she had something to contribute. After some more gentle arguing, Jake finally agreed to let Sarah drive them home. The children piled into her small car with the practiced efficiency of people used to making do with limited space. Jake folded his long frame into the passenger seat and gave Sarah directions to the ranch. The drive took them through some of the most beautiful country Sarah had ever seen. Rolling hills stretched out in every direction, dotted with cattle and occasional farmhouses. The storm clouds were breaking up, allowing patches of late afternoon sunlight to illuminate the landscape in golden pools. "It's gorgeous out here," Sarah said as they turned onto a gravel road that led toward a cluster of buildings in the distance.
"Best view in Montana," Jake agreed.
Maria used to say she could sit on the front porch and watch the world change colors all day long. As they approached the ranch, Sarah could see why Maria Morrison had loved it. The main house was a 2-story farmhouse painted white with green trim, surrounded by large oak trees that had probably been planted decades ago. There were several outbuildings, including a large red barn and what looked like a workshop. Cattle grazed in the pastures beyond, and mountains rose in the distance like a painted backdrop. But she could also see signs of the struggle Jake had mentioned. The fence around the front yard needed repair, and one of the outbuilding roofs was missing several shingles. The paint on the house was peeling in places, and the front porch sagged slightly on one end. "Home sweet home," Jake said as Sarah pulled up in front of the house. The children tumbled out of the car and ran toward the house, their energy restored now that they were on familiar ground.
Jake started to follow them, then turned back to Sarah. "Would you like to come in for a minute?" he asked. "Maybe have some coffee before you drive back? It's the least I can do after everything you've done today." Sarah knew she should probably head home.
It was getting late, and she had lesson plans to work on for Monday. But something about the way Jake had asked, almost shyly, made her nod.
"I'd like that," she said.
The inside of the Morrison house was much like the man himself, sturdy, practical, and showing the wear of hard use but built to last. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable, and every surface seemed to be covered with evidence of children's lives, homework papers, small toys, books, and drawings stuck to the refrigerator with colorful magnets. "It's not much," Jake said, following Sarah's gaze around the living room.
"It's a home," Sarah replied, and she meant it.
Despite the clutter and the obvious signs of a house that needed a woman's touch, there was something warm and welcoming about the Morrison house that her own neat apartment lacked. Emma was already in the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. "I'm making grilled cheese for dinner," she announced.
"We have enough for Miss Martinez too, if she wants to stay."
"Oh, I don't want to impose on your family dinner," Sarah said quickly.
"You're not imposing," Jake said. "Emma's grilled cheese is famous around here. Besides, it's the least we can do."
Before Sarah could protest further, she found herself seated at the Morrison family's kitchen table, watching Emma direct her siblings in setting places and preparing the simple meal. The twins were assigned to cutting tomatoes, under careful supervision, while Lily folded napkins and Tommy arranged the plates. It was clear that this family had developed systems for getting things done, and everyone had a role to play. Even 4-year-old Tommy knew exactly where everything went and took his responsibilities seriously. "This is how we do it every night," Jake explained, settling into the chair across from Sarah. "Everyone helps, everyone contributes.
It's the only way it works."
As Sarah watched the Morrison family work together to prepare their dinner, she found herself thinking about all the times people had told her she couldn't be a mother. Sitting here, surrounded by these children who had accepted her presence so naturally, those voices seemed smaller and less important than they had in years. When Emma placed a perfectly golden grilled cheese sandwich in front of her, accompanied by a cup of tomato soup that smelled like childhood comfort, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't that her medical condition had suddenly changed or that her longing for biological children had disappeared. But, for the first time, she could imagine a different kind of family, a different way of loving and being loved.
"Miss Martinez," Tommy said from his seat beside her, "do you have any kids?"
The question that had haunted Sarah for years, the one that usually made her stumble over explanations and feel the familiar ache of failure, came out of Tommy's mouth with such innocent curiosity that it didn't hurt the way it usually did. "No, Tommy," she said simply.
"I don't have any children."
"That's too bad," Tommy replied matter-of-factly.
"You're really good at fixing things."
"Kids need people who are good at fixing things." Out of the mouths of babes, Sarah thought, meeting Jake's eyes across the table. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read, but there was something warm and considering in his gaze that made her feel suddenly self-conscious.
After dinner, Jake offered to show Sarah around the ranch before she drove home.
The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reflected off the mountains in the distance. They walked past the barn where Jake kept his horses, through the pasture where his cattle grazed peacefully in the evening light. "This is where I grew up," Jake said as they stood looking out over the rolling hills. "My dad used to bring me out here when I was Tommy's age, teach me about the land and the animals.
Always thought I'd do the same thing with my kids."
"And you are," Sarah pointed out. "Some days it feels like I'm just barely hanging on," Jake admitted. "The ranch is struggling, the kids need so much, and I'm just one person trying to do the work of 3. Sarah looked back toward the house, where she could see the children through the kitchen window, Emma helping the younger ones with what looked like homework while Lily and Tommy played with building blocks on the floor.
"They seem pretty happy to me," she said.
"They deserve better than what I can give them," Jake replied. "A real home, stability, someone who knows how to braid hair and help with girl problems."
Emma's growing up too fast because she's trying to fill a role that shouldn't be hers. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying.
In a small town like Millbrook, there weren't many options for a single father with 5 children and a struggling ranch. Most women his age were already married or had moved away to bigger cities. And the few who remained weren't looking to take on someone else's large, ready-made family.
The right person wouldn't see them as a burden, Sarah said quietly.
Jake looked at her sharply, as if he had heard something in her voice that surprised him.
You really think that?
I know it, Sarah replied with more certainty than she had felt about anything in a long time. They walked back to the house in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When they reached Sarah's car, Jake thanked her again for all her help during the day.
It was nothing, Sarah said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Would you?
Jake started, then seemed to lose his nerve.
Would you maybe like to come out for dinner again sometime?
The kids really seem to enjoy having you here. Sarah felt her heart flutter in a way it hadn't in years.
I'd like that very much.
As Sarah drove home through the Montana evening, the Morrison ranch growing smaller in her rearview mirror, she found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with Mrs. Chen that morning. The older woman had warned her that Jake Morrison carried a lot of weight on his shoulders, but what Sarah had discovered was a man who carried that weight with grace and determination. More than that, she had spent an entire day around children, 5 of them, and, for the first time in her adult life, she hadn't felt broken or incomplete. Instead, she had felt useful, needed, like she had something valuable to offer a family that needed her particular strengths.
The doctors had been right about one thing: Sarah's body couldn't create children.
But maybe, just maybe, they had been wrong about everything else.
Maybe being a mother wasn't just about biology.
Maybe it was about love, and patience, and knowing how to turn a spilled shirt into an adventure. Maybe it was about finding a family that needed you just as much as you needed them.
As Sarah pulled into the parking space behind Mrs. Chen's bakery, she made a decision.
Tomorrow, she would start looking into what it would take to help a struggling rancher keep his family together. Not because she wanted something in return, but because sometimes the best way to heal your own heart was to help someone else protect theirs. The rain had stopped completely now, and stars were beginning to appear in the clearing sky. For the first time in years, Sarah Martinez fell asleep thinking not about what she couldn't have, but about what might be possible if she was brave enough to reach for it.